We all must die. In the world of the Forgotten Realms, one god made sure that you would never forget that, and his name is Myrkul, the Lord of Bones. And he is no ordinary god of death. I guess technically because he isn't a god of death. He is the god of the dead, which is a very important distinction to make. He governs much of what happens after death has claimed you, not before. And what's so interesting about Myrkul is how actively and eerily he reminds mortals of their mortality. He's been known to materialize beside open graves during funerals, and in those moments he would look merely as a cowled skeletal figure that just silently watches. It is said that out of all of the gods in the Forgotten Realms, Myrkul was one of the least popular, but ironically also one of the most well-known. Everyone, regardless of how erudite or how peasant, could very easily picture his symbol in their mind. A simple skull beset by a triangle. And absolutely everyone, regardless of how powerful or wealthy you are, knew that eventually death would take its due. And it is only a matter of time until the god of the dead will come tolling. The god that no one likes, but the god they all respect. Myrkul is the last of the Dead Three, a trio of mortals who rose to become gods, left their mark upon the world, and then perished during the time of troubles. A legendary event in the world where all of the gods were forced to walk the planet as mortals. But much like Bane and Baal, Myrkul's divine spirit also lingered within the world after their demise, clinging to life through the centuries until it was finally time to reawaken. It is kind of interesting actually that Bane, Baal, and Myrkul all have been known as the Dead Three for so long that it feels right to continue using the title even though they are technically not dead anymore. But we should just go ahead and talk about it. Today we're going to be covering the last of the Dead Three, Myrkul, the Lord of Bones. But before we get started, this video is brought to you by Ghostfire Gaming and their new release, The Ethereal Expanse, Dreams of the Drowned God. Dreams of the Drowned God is a 5e campaign for characters level 1 to level 13, designed by Will Doyle, known for his work on Rime of the Frostmaiden, Tomb of Annihilation, and The Wild Beyond the Witchlight. See, let me tell you why this is exciting. Back in 2022, Wizards of the Coast released the Spelljammer setting for 5th edition, and let's just say that the reception was not great, with people particularly disappointed with how bare bones the ship combat rules were. Well, fast forward to 2023 and Ghostfire Gaming released the Ethereal Expanse, a setting set in the astral plane with some real ship rules and combat. Customizable and upgradable ships, rules for ship movement and astral battles, navigation, supplies, crews, morale, handling, the magic of the vessels. I mean, there were over 30 pages dedicated to all of these concepts. And of course everything else that a setting needs, like locations and whatnot. But well, Dreams of the Drowned God is exciting because it is giving us finally an actual adventure in this setting. We will finally get to sail the astral sea like God intended. The adventure is a point-crawl sandbox, allowing players to chart their own course across numerous worlds aboard their ship, using a unique balance of war mechanic that allows the game master to track the shifting allegiances and military readiness of the story's major factions. Player actions can push a faction towards open war or keep their relative peace, triggering dynamic events that reshape the world. The adventure is driven by the Clue Board, a physical collection of illustrated handouts that players will investigate. Players will uncover secrets and expand the board, revealing new plot threads and destinations. There is only 1 week left, so get this book before it is too late. If you're looking for an astral seafaring adventure, you do not want to miss this opportunity. You have 6 days left, so do not wait. Dreams of the Drowned God, the link is in the description. But now, back to the video. Long ago, in an ancient age of Faerun, Myrkul Bey al-Kursi was a mortal prince of Murgum, a land far to the east, where he grew as a powerful necromancer. Alongside 2 ruthless companions, of course Bane and Baal, he embarked on a dark quest for godhood. But of course, you already know the story. The trio scoured the lands for any power that could elevate them to divinity, gathering armies and even slaying demigods to siphon their essence for strength, until, when they were finally strong enough, they would go on to invade Jurgul's domain, the ancient god of the dead. Jurgul, tiring of his role, agreed to relinquish his power to the 3 adventurers. Legend says that the trio settled who would claim which portion of Jurgel's domain with a game of knucklebones. Bane, who had won the game, chose strife and tyranny, wanting to become the ultimate ruler. Ball, who got last on the game, chose death, for he wanted to one-up Bane by being able to destroy all that Bane ruled over. Myrkul, however, chose dominion over the dead, thinking himself as the true victor in the game, as all things do eventually die and hence all things will inevitably become his. Even the gods. Even his friends, when they too eventually perish. And then, since that moment, Myrkul became the Grim Reaper of Faerun. Throughout his tenure as the Lord of the Dead, Myrkul presided over the fate of souls with an iron hand. He ruled from the Bone Castle, the old lair of Jurgel where he once served as the God of the Dead, which is itself found at the center of the City of the Dead, also known as the City of Strife, the realm where all the souls go after they die. At this point in time, the realm was found in Oinus, the first layer of Hades. But fun fact, Jurgel actually stayed in the city in order to serve Myrkul as his seneschal, even after Myrkul rose to take his place. Jurgel did so in order to teach him and assist him in handling the role for caring over the dead. It is interesting to note that Jurgel actually retained a portion of his once magnificent power, though exactly how much is never truly told to us. What we do know is that Jurgel remained as the scribe of the dead, to basically note down all who ceased to be in his scroll. And we know that his title is the Lord of the End of Everything, which is notably more impressive than simply the Lord of the Dead, seeing as his title covers even that which cannot die, but I digress. The reason Jurgel remained to assist Myrkul is because, unlike many other gods, Myrkul, being the god of the dead, actually had a job that needed to be done. See, when souls go to the City of the Dead, unless they are already claimed by another god, usually because they venerated that god in life, the souls had to be judged. If a soul was judged as faithless, which was the term used to describe those souls who did not worship any god in life, then that soul was annexed into the wall of the faithless, doomed to remain and wiggle for eternity in the wall until such time that the soul would simply dissolve into the very substance that formed the wall. It is understood that everyone in the Forgotten Realms knew or knows that this is what happens to those that do not pick a god to venerate in life, which is why following at least one god when you're living is very common in this world. But now, beside the faithless souls, there were also the falls, which were souls that betrayed the gods. This is a bit more open-ended and could mean all kinds of things, but generally speaking, we would be talking about souls that first of all are not claimed by any god, and then second of all would have to have broken some kind of oath or responsibility to one or more of the gods. These souls would then be judged by the god of the dead, and if found guilty, they would be sentenced to a punishment that could literally be anything, as determined by the god. They could be made to suffer in torture for eternity, to become obedient slaves to the god, to serve the City of the Dead as guides, or really anything in between. Much how it is important for, say, Mystra, the goddess of magic, to maintain control over her portfolio and keep magic working, such was Myrkul's job important, to keep the steady flow of souls moving, and then to render proper judgment to those that deserved it, which again is why Jurgel remained to counsel and assist them. This job is important. But now, what made Myrkul particularly different from the other gods of the dead is that he does not actually hate undeath. In fact, he saw the undead as simply useful tools and often granted the power to create them to his followers, or even taught some of them how to become liches or other powerful forms of undead. This is, of course, highly unusual because keeping a soul from passing on to the afterlife could be seen as directly removing Myrkul's ability to control or judge that soul in the City of the Dead. So usually a god of the dead would not allow for this power. But what is interesting about not just Myrkul, but I guess all of the Dead 3, is actually their obsession with Faerun. To them, it almost seemed like obtaining more power, respect, or influence in Faerun itself was actually more valuable than obtaining such in another realm or in the Outer Planes. Myrkul would rather allow undead in Faerun to gain more influence and power in Faerun, rather than to gain the souls that would give him more power in the afterlife. But once again, I digress. In the Year of Shadows, 1358 DR, so about 150 years before the present time, Myrkul and Bane undertook a plot bold enough to shake the cosmos. They stole the Tablets of Fate from Ao, the overgod of all gods. To recap, the tablets were mystical artifacts that codified the gods' roles and domains. Essentially, they were Eos's rules for the cosmos. Myrkul and Bane hoped that by hiding the tablets, Eo would be weakened or forced to negotiate, potentially allowing the Dead Three to gain even greater power. But instead, their plan greatly backfired. Eo responded by casting all of the gods out of the heavens, even the innocent ones, forcing them into mortal avatars on Faerun. We call this the Time of Troubles. And just like that, suddenly Myrkul found himself stuck in a frail physical form like the very mortals that he once lorded over. And to make matters worse, one of those tablets of fate that he had stolen had now been lost and taken by the avatar of a powerful enemy on the material plane. And so, Myrkul had a great problem. As a mortal avatar, he could be killed, and several of his divine peers were being hunted down and slain during the chaos. And so, he needed to collect the Tablet of Fate. And so, he schemed. The missing Tablet of Fate was found in the city of Tantris, in the Temple of Torm's Coming. Of course, a Temple of Torm, god of duty, loyalty, and righteousness. As part of their assault in the city to claim the tablet, Myrkul and Bane devised a mass-scale death spell that used the true names of presumably thousands of assassins scattered all across Faerun, with the intent in order to kill all of those assassins, so that then Bane could absorb those souls and greatly grow in power, and then challenge the Avatar of Torm. And so they did, but unfortunately it was not enough, and Bane was killed by the Avatar of Torm. The ritual also ended up weakening Baal drastically since, of course, assassins are basically his followers, which would go on to get him killed later on as well. But to go on an important side tangent, see, there was a powerful group of adventurers drawn together by the events of the Time of Troubles, who would come to do great things together. A wizard called Midnight, a warrior called Kelemvor, a rogue called Cyric, and a priest called Adon. Cyric would go on to kill Baal and rise to divinity as a result, obtaining the portfolio of the Dead Three: strife, murder, and death. We covered this on our last two videos where we covered Bane and Baal. But now, the other three adventurers, however, they would find themselves challenging Myrkul for control over the last Tablet of Fate that he needed. The Tablet of Fate was moved from Tantris all the way over to Waterdeep by them, all the while being followed and hunted by Night Riders sent by Myrkul. Then, in the city of Waterdeep, Myrkul himself led a powerful horde of undead, appearing from a massive portal found under the city and swarming Waterdeep from inside. Myrkul was actually able to take over the Blackstaff Tower, the Tower of the Archmage of Waterdeep, and collected the Tablet of Fate inside. But then, after Myrkul combined the two tablets together, the one he already had and the one he was able to take from the tower, he made his way through the celestial staircase into the outer planes. But there, in a crazy final battle in the skies of the city of Waterdeep, attempting to enter the celestial staircase, the heroes succeeded in slaying Myrkul, as Midnight casted a disintegrate spell on the avatar of the god of the dead and killed him. Long story short, Midnight ascended into divinity to replace Mystra as the new god of magic, as Mystra was also killed in the Time of Troubles. And then Kelemvor would rise up later on to become the new god of the dead to replace Cyric, who had himself replaced Myrkul before that. And with the Tablets of Fate restored, everything returned to normal, somewhat. It was still pretty crazy even after that, but anyhow, what happened to Myrkul? Well, remember when I said that Myrkul assaulted and took over the Tower of the Blackstaff? Well, there was an interesting artifact that the Blackstaff was keeping in that tower. The artifact is called the Crown of Horns. When Myrkul's avatar was slain in Waterdeep, the majority of his divine power passed on as the rules of the Divine demanded. By all rights, Myrkul should have been utterly gone. But he had one last contingency in place. In his final moments, Myrkul cast out his consciousness, seeking any anchor that could keep him tied to the mortal world. And he found one, the Crown of Horns, hidden not far from the site of his demise. In its original form, the Crown of Horns was an electrum helm bristling with tiny horns and adorned with a ring of black gems. Some say that it was forged by Myrkul himself in ancient times. Others whisper that it was a product of Netherese arch-wizards, but either way, the crown had a long and dark history. It was even credited with playing a part in the downfall of Netheril, the ancient empire of magic. Over the ages, the crown surfaced now and then, leaving chaos in its wake, controlling those who would wear it and using them to bring about destruction. One of the most famous examples of this is actually Laeral Silverhand, one of the famous Seven Sisters. You might recognize her as the current Open Lord of Waterdeep in the present day, the ruler of the city. Several decades before the Time of Troubles, Laeral stumbled upon the Crown of Horns with her adventuring company, and despite sensing the evil inside of it, Laeral's pride led her to don the artifact, thinking that she could resist its influence, but she was very, very wrong. The crown seized control over her mind, and under its influence, Laeral became the Witch Queen of the North, turning against her allies and causing untold devastation for years. It took nothing less than her lover, Kelvin Arunson, the Black Staff himself, calling upon the power of the goddess Mystra and engaging Laeral in an epic spell battle to break the hold of the crown. The duel ravaged the High Forest. Magic of unimaginable scale was thrown around until Kelvin finally managed to sunder the crown of horns from Laeral's head and then shatter it into pieces. Laeral was saved, albeit left mentally shattered for a time, and Kelvin was able to collect the jagged horned shards of the crown in order to lock them away in his vault at the Blackstaff Tower in Waterdeep. And so, decades later, at the very moment his avatar was destroyed, Myrkul's spirit found the shards of the Crown of Horns and fused with the artifact, combining the shards and rebuilding the crown, then using the artifact to hide the remains of his spirit like a form of deific phylactery. Following the god's destruction, the Crown of Horns essentially was Myrkul. His consciousness lived in the circlet, intelligent and evil as ever. Anyone who put it on would find themselves communing with Myrkul, who would slowly warp the wearer's mind and drive them paranoid, eventually possessing them outright. No individual could remove the crown once it was worn unless Myrkul allowed it, but in return, it did bless the wearer with incredible, almost demigod-like powers. The wearer would be surrounded by an aura that produced fear. They would become immune to death magic and necromancy spells. They would be able to command undead with ease. They could teleport all across Faerun, and more. Over time, the wearer themselves would physically decay, turning into a lich-like creature under Myrkul's control. The ability for Myrkul to teleport the crown, or to teleport whoever wore it, it was actually what allowed him to escape the clutches of those who sought to destroy him or the crown, and so that's how Myrkul remained safe, his spirit alive, for the next 150 years, literally up until the present day. It is funny that the lore states that Myrkul actually relished his new existence inside of the crown, freed from the responsibilities and restrictions of godhood. He could now indulge in causing chaos and death on his own terms. For example, he would deliberately spread rumors among the followers of Cyric about the crown, back when Cyric was still the god of the dead, in order to effectively bait Cyricists into seeking the crown only to corrupt or destroy them for his own amusement. But the question is, where is the crown now? Well, the last mention of the Crown of Horns places it in Skullport, underneath Waterdeep, where it was worn by a UNT slaver about 100 years ago. You see, 100 years ago there was yet another world-scale calamity called the Spell Plague, which in a way is kind of like the sequel to the Time of Troubles, only because it was caused by Cyric, now being the god of strife and murder, basically murdering Midnight, who herself was now the new goddess of magic. And with the goddess of magic being murdered, magic basically went haywire in Faerun and caused all manner of chaos in the world. But it was this chaotic upheaval of magic that caused Neris, the UNT that wore the Crown of Horns at the time, to mutate into a monstrous feral creature that still lurks the lowest reaches of Skullport to this day. The reason I brought all this up is because in Dungeon Magazine number 200, which is technically an official Wizards of the Coast release and whose editorial was actually handled by Chris Perkins himself, states that as part of the transformation, the crown literally fused with the UNT, transforming the UNT into the Myrk Stalker, a lich-like monstrosity that, as of 1479 DR, which is basically just like 15 years before the present time, is still alive. So right under the very noses of Waterdeep, right under the nose of Laeral Silverhand herself, Right there in Skullport lies a monster in hiding that wears one of the most powerful artifacts in the world, housing the soul of a godlike being inside a divine phylactery. Though to be fair, we actually don't know whether Myrkul is still inside the crown or not. Much like how a real phylactery can reform the body of the lich whose soul it harbors, it is possible that the crown of horns could have reforged a body for Myrkul to use. It is also possible that the death of Midnight and the ensuing spell plague might have given Myrkul the power to reform, seeing as it was Midnight the one who killed him, so her death might have unshackled him to reform. You know, such poetic events tend to hold power over gods and spirits, so it is possible. It is also possible that Cyric, losing his control over the realm of the dead to Kalimvor, may have also allowed Myrkul to recover a fraction of his lost power in the transition. But what we do know is that nowadays, Myrkul does appear to be powerful enough to grant spells to his followers, to select chosen and imbue them with great power and blessings, and to even summon a powerful avatar as a manifestation of his will. All of these are the power of the gods. So divine power Myrkul still has. And of course, the most important thing that we do know is that Myrkul is still alive. But okay, let's take a breather from all of that. Now let's focus on the Church of Myrkul as it stands on the Forgotten Realms. The faithful of Myrkul are called Myrkulites, and like I said before, they are neither a huge nor a popular religion in the realms. Myrkul's followers are typically a morose, secretive lot, the kind of people who work with death, you know, undertakers, gravediggers, embalmers, executioners, plague doctors, and the like. They usually keep to themselves rather than to preach their faith openly, even as they perform the essential services of their station. The overall mission of Myrkul's clergy is basically simple: to make folk fear and respect death, and by extension, of course, to fear and respect Myrkul, doing so by never letting people forget the certainty of death. All priests of Myrkul wear black robes with deep cowled hoods, usually layered with a black or dark gray cloak and cinched at the waist by a single bone white sash. In public, they were never seen without their skull masks that covered their upper side of their face in the shape of a leering skull. Any skin that still showed, such as their hands or the lower side of their face, would be darkened with ash or soot, so that the priest would look as gaunt and corpse-like as possible. Despite their frightening style, though, the activities of the clergy of Myrkul were often very, publicly useful. These were the people you'd hire to handle the dead bodies that no one else would want to touch. You know, day to day, Myrkulite clergy would roam the realms performing funerals and burial rites, or tending to cemeteries. They offered their services to any who could pay, which was how the church actually sustained itself. Their fees, which would be called either grave fees or skull fees, were accepted for such tasks like properly interring a loved one, saying prayers to ease the passage of a soul, or even mummifying and preserving the remains of a dead body if desired. Because the priests of Myrkul had a supernatural resistance to disease and plague, a particular blessing of Myrkul, they were in particular demand during outbreaks of sickness. When a plague struck a town, as most clergy of other gods would flee or bar their doors, the Myrkulites would then show up and, for the right price, dispose of the deceased corpses and administer last rites to the dying. It kind of made them oddly indispensable during the worst of times. They took on pains to make the dying comfortable, but notably they were forbidden from promising healing or any kind of rescue. In fact, Myrkul never allowed his clergy to perform resurrections. Instead, what would actually happen is Myrkulites would often handle the wills of the dead. So people would basically pay them, either in advance or as part of their will, to set their matters in order or to carry out their last wishes. And of course, as you can imagine, some of these tasks would often be to arrange for their resurrection. In such cases, the Myrkulites would then take the payment and arrange to move the body to the designated temple of another god so that they could be the ones to resurrect the deceased. And this was a perfectly valid and allowed practice amongst the church, which again made them very indispensable to the citizens of Faerun. It's actually interesting that some of these services or last wishes that they would carry out for the people in return for skull fees could be as simple as, make sure that my estranged son received my inheritance, or as hardcore as hunt down the murderer that killed me and make him pay. Anything was really possible, so long as the skull fee was paid, the demands were made by the deceased, and the payment was accepted by the clergy of Myrkul. It is interesting that compared to the Church of Baal and the Church of Bane, the Myrkulites were actually way more chill, particularly since they rely so much on being on the good graces of society. Even looking back at Baldur's Gate 3, you can even tell that it is not the Church of Myrkul who is going out into the city killing and murdering everyone. But for a third time, I digress. The primary daily ritual of the Church of Myrkul was called the Dusking. Lay worshippers were encouraged to whisper a personal prayer to Myrkul at nightfall every day. At the beginning and end of the prayer, particularly so if done at a large temple or whenever an offering would be made to the temple, a deep bell would toll, basically to signal the appeasement of Myrkul. The greatest holiday in Myrkul's religion was the Feast of the Moon, which is a Faerun-wide festival to honor ancestors and the departed, typically occurring during the last night of autumn. The Myrkulites called this night the day the dead are most with us. They believed that on this evening, the spirits of all who had died in the past year were closest to the living world, able to observe or even send signs to the living. To the general populace, the Feast of the Moon would be a bittersweet time to remember loved ones, but to the faithful of Myrkul, it was a more literal thing, as they would be able to basically literally see the dead walk that night and hear their voices, who would often do so in order to either deliver messages or to watch their descendants. The Myrkulite clergy would hold solemn observances all day and night for that day, chanting dirges, telling tales of famous deaths, and making sure that everyone felt the presence of the departed. At midnight, they would conclude with a beautiful and haunting ceremony called the Flagons of the Fallen. In this ritual, the priests would fill glasses of wine or ale, and then by magic, they would set these drinks alight with cold blue flame. These ghostly flaming goblets were then left out on altars or gravestones as offerings, so that the spirits of the dead could drink and feel a moment of warmth in the beyond. It is honestly kind of cool. Now, the organization of Myrkul's clergy didn't have the elaborate rankings that some religions did, but they did use pretty crazy titles. Lower-ranking priests would simply be called Doom Guides or Night Ministers, whereas higher clergy would often be called Death Bringers, or they simply would carry the title Doom in some form, such as High Doom or Elder Doom. Oh, and for those of you who don't know, in Dungeons & Dragons lingo, a Doom is a dungeon created by a lich. So let's say that a lich is named Plaesar, then Plaesar Doom would be his lair or dungeon. And so since Myrkul is closely associated with liches, the term Doom is, as you can see, used very often in their church. But now, in terms of magic and specialties, Myrkul's priests are, as you can guess, granted spells over death, decay, and the afterlife. Clerics chosen to be granted these powerful abilities by Myrkul would be called Grey Ones. These clerics were granted these rare spells, they were given the ability to control a large number of undead at the same time, and were taught the arcane inner workings and differences between all of the different kinds of undead. Now, examples of the spells that they would be given by Myrkul would include the second level spell Bone Bite, that would allow a Grey One to animate bones in order to transform them into razor-sharp jaws. Then there's the fourth level spell Corrupt, which is a versatile spell that can do almost anything. The Grey One would touch an object as part of the casting, and then the object would be made lesser or would be made foul. For example, a Grey One could cast this on a body of water in order to ruin it, or onto a wall in order to break it down, or to create a hole on that wall. They could also cast it on a healing potion to reduce how much the potion healed for, or onto a weapon to reduce the damage that it dealt. They could even use the spell on a magical item to nullify its magical effects for a small period of time. This spell is so strong and so versatile that I'm actually shocked that it is just a Myrkul exclusive spell. But anyways, there are other spells like Wither, which functioned like the ability from ghosts to, drain life and then age their victims. And then there was also the spell Quench the Spirit, which was Myrkul's take on the Finger of Death spell, except that Myrkul allowed their priest to cast it as a 6th level spell, so it was substantially stronger in that way. But yeah, there you have it, fellas. That's about it. Myrkul and his clergy. I will make a note that after Myrkul's supposed death, much how it happened with the clergy of the other dead three, the Church of Myrkul for the most part moved on and adapted to follow Cyric when he became the new god of the dead, and then of course later on adapted once more to follow Kelemvor when he became the new god of the dead after that. Since Myrkul's clergy have always been so focused on their work as part of the system, rather than to simply be a vessel for Myrkul's will, it was easy for them to simply move on and continue doing what they were already doing even after Myrkul's death. But also for that reason, it is assumed that not much has really changed in how the church behaves as the years have passed, other than they probably no longer accept or practice the rising of undead, as Kellenborg of course does not like the undead as much as Myrkul does. But there it is. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please do consider supporting us over on Patreon so that you can get our Myrkul PDF packet, which includes easy to access bullet points and tables on the Church of the God of the Dead, to make it easier for you to run adventures using a god like Myrkul. We also have a 5th edition conversion of the Grey 1 subclass from 2nd edition, as well as conversions of the exclusive spells granted to them by Myrkul, so you can use them in your games. We do this for every video, so please consider supporting us on Patreon to get this packet and that for all of the other videos that we have done this for, which currently includes Bane, Ball, the Dark Urge, and of course this one, Myrkul. And thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all next time.